Whenever a major hurricane makes landfall, the same question always pops up. Is climate change to blame? It's a debate that feels more intense with every passing year. But to really get a handle on where we are today, it helps to rewind the clock a bit. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to dive into a really important scientific paper from 2005 that tried to cut through all the noise and give us a clear way to think about this exact problem. This is the question, right? It's what dominates the headlines. It's what we all talk about. It feels incredibly urgent and personal, and it demands an answer. And back in 2005, after a particularly brutal hurricane season, the pressure to find that answer was, well, it was immense. And this quote, which actually comes from the paper we're looking at, just nails the problem perfectly. You've got society on one side basically demanding, give us answers, now. And on the other, you have the scientific process, which needs to be careful, deliberate, and certain. As climatologist Linda Mearns warned, rushing to judgment here, yeah, that can be very dangerous. So how do scientists even begin to navigate this storm of debate? Well, we're going to break down exactly how this one really influential team of scientists went about it back in 2005. They basically gave us a roadmap for thinking clearly about this. Okay, so our guide for this journey is a paper published in the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society. In it, you had this team of heavy hitters, hurricane specialists, climate policy experts, and they just systematically took apart all the evidence they had back in 2005. So, to try and make sense of this super complicated issue, they came up with a simple framework. It basically splits the problem into two distinct parts. And honestly, if you get this distinction, you'll understand their entire argument. Okay, first up, you've got what they call event risk. This is pretty straightforward. It's all about the storm itself, the pure physics of it. How often do these storms pop up? And how strong are they when they do? This is the part of the equation that happens out over the water. All right, then there's part two, vulnerability. Now, this has zero to do with the weather. It has everything to do with us. It's about what and who is sitting in the path of the storm. How many people are living on the coast? How much stuff, expensive property, have we built there? And when you mash those two things together, the storm and what's in its way, you get what they call outcome risk. This is the stuff we actually see and feel, the dollar signs, the destruction, right? A monster hurricane hitting a totally empty coastline does zero damage. But even a weaker storm hitting a huge city, that can be an absolute catastrophe. It's the combination that really counts. Okay, so with that framework, event risk plus vulnerability, the scientists got to work. And the very first question they asked on the event risk side of things was a big one. Are we just getting more hurricanes? Well, looking at all the data they had back then, the paper's conclusion was pretty darn clear. If you look at the planet as a whole, there just wasn't a trend of more and more tropical cyclones forming. But, of course, it's never that simple, right? This is where the nuance really kicks in. Sure, if you lived near the Atlantic, it definitely felt like things were getting crazier since the mid-90s. But the paper points out that this uptick fit right into these well-known natural cycles that last for decades. I mean, the 1940s to the 60s were also super active periods. And on top of all that, the climate models back then, they were all over the place. Some said more storms, some said fewer. So the bottom line was, there was no real scientific consensus on frequency.
All right, so if the number of storms wasn't the smoking gun, what about their strength? This is the other half of that event risk puzzle. Are the storms that do form getting beefier?
And this is where things get really interesting. The authors laid out this kind of contrast. On one hand, the theory made perfect sense. Warmer oceans are basically rocket fuel for hurricanes, so in theory, they should be able to get stronger. But when they looked at the actual real-world data from the past, the evidence for a clear, steady increase was, as they put it, weak. Okay, so what did the future look like? Well, the best computer models at the time, from a study by Knutson and Tulia, predicted a potential 5% increase in a hurricane's wind speed, but not until the year 2080. But here's the kicker. The authors argued that a 5% change over that long a period was so tiny it would be totally lost in the background noise of natural ups and downs. I mean, hurricanes are naturally variable, and the tools we had in 2005 just weren't good enough to reliably pick out such a faint signal.
So let's recap. If the data on how many storms we get and how strong they are wasn't showing a clear climate fingerprint back in 2005, it raises a massive question. And this brings us to the paper's biggest reveal.
If the storms themselves weren't getting demonstrably worse, why were the damage costs skyrocketing? I mean, if the event risk wasn't changing all that much, something else had to be pushing that outcome risk through the roof.
And this is where the paper makes its most powerful point. The authors basically said, hey, everyone is looking in the wrong place. The answer wasn't up in the atmosphere. It was right here, on the ground.
And this right here is the absolute heart of their argument. What their projections showed was that for every single dollar in future damages you could blame on global warming making storms worse, you could expect somewhere between $22 and $60 in damages just because more people and more valuable stuff were being built on the coast. The societal growth signal was just completely overwhelming the climate signal.
Okay, so let's wrap this all up. What were the final takeaways the authors had based on everything they knew back in 2005?
Their main conclusion was that claiming a solid link at that time was, in their words, premature. And they gave 3 solid reasons why. 1, there was no smoking gun connecting greenhouse gases to how hurricanes were actually behaving. 2, the consensus was that any future changes in intensity would likely be small and really hard to even spot. And 3, the biggest factor of all, our own societal growth in coastal areas was just so massive it dwarfed any potential climate signal.
So the big takeaway here wasn't really about the weather at all. It was about us. The paper made the case that the most critical factors driving future hurricane damage were our own decisions. Where we build, how we build, and how seriously we take preparation. That's what we could actually control.
And all of this led the authors to one final, really thought-provoking question. They suggested that, look, there are plenty of great reasons for climate policy, but maybe hurricanes weren't the strongest one. And on the flip side, if your main goal is to reduce hurricane damage, maybe focusing only on energy policy isn't the most direct way to do it. It really leaves us with this critical question to chew on. Are we applying the right solutions to the right problems?